The chandeliers above glittered like glass thorns, refracting the golden light into fractured constellations across the ballroom's marble floor. Waiters in white gloves danced between clusters of executives, their silver trays clinking with champagne flutes and whispered alliances. Alicia Carter stood just behind her husband, smiling politely, her expression immaculate, practiced. The black silk of her sheath dress clung to her form with sculpted elegance, but it felt more like armor than fashion. Her stiletto heels clicked in time with his words, as if she were an accessory to his performance. Tom Carter was in his element. "She's the perfect corporate wife," he said, raising his glass in a lazy half-toast to a group of investors from Tokyo. "Brilliant, beautiful, and knows how to keep quiet when real business is being discussed." Laughter followed. Half appreciative, half nervous, Alicia smiled through clenched teeth. She had heard it all before. He leaned closer, his breath soaked in bourbon. "Try not to embarrass me tonight," he muttered beneath the laughter, his voice razor thin. Alicia's knuckles tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. A quiet rage flared behind her eyes. But only for a moment. She exhaled, let it slip away. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Across the room, Victor Lawson, the CEO of Carter's firm, watched with unreadable calm. Silver temples, dark suit, eyes like steel behind glass. He raised his own glass slowly, nodded at Alicia, then crossed the room like a shadow that had learned to walk upright. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, and only then did she realize he had never called her by her first name. "Tell me something," he continued, his voice a low hush. "What has he done?" She blinked, startled. For a breath, a second, she saw in his gaze not corporate detachment but understanding. A mirror, perhaps, or a trap. She began. Victor leaned in, his whisper like the flick of a scalpel. "Tell me, Alicia. The rest is my business." For the first time in months, her throat constricted not from fear, but the taste of possibility. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. Tom appeared behind her. His arms snaked around her waist possessively. "Victor," he boomed as if nothing had happened, "you finally get to meet my little prize." Alicia's smile returned, colder this time, but when Victor's eyes met hers again, something shifted. The room felt smaller, like the walls were listening. Later that night, after the applause and speeches, Alicia locked herself in the bathroom of their penthouse suite. She sat on the edge of the marble tub, pulled out her phone, and opened her encrypted audio journal. Her voice trembled only slightly as she began recording. Day 163. "Tonight, in front of half the company, he called me a prize. But someone saw through it. I think I'm not alone anymore." Outside, Tom laughed with someone on the phone, likely betting on futures he could barely afford. Inside, Alicia whispered to herself. Soon. By Monday morning, Alicia had memorized the sound of silence. Not the soothing kind, but the one that buzzed beneath your skin when the truth itched to come out. She sat in the driver's seat of her black coupe, parked 2 blocks from the Carter Tech building. Her hand hovered over the start button as she stared at the revolving glass doors ahead. Everyone knew her as Tom Carter's wife, flawless, composed, forgettable. But that version of her had cracked over the weekend, and the pieces no longer fit. On the passenger seat, her old leather-bound journal lay open. The pages were lined with entries no one had ever seen, each one a wound. Each one dated, documented, bruised arms hidden under sleeves, words that stung more than fists, the patterns of control, and now finally the beginning of a plan. She pressed the start button. Upstairs, on the 49th floor, Victor Lawson stood alone in the glass conference room. His reflection overlapped with the skyline as he scrolled through a file on his tablet. A knock interrupted the rhythm. Alicia stepped in, no longer in soft beige or silk pastels. Today, she wore charcoal gray and matte lipstick. No wedding ring. Victor's gaze flicked to her hand. "You came? I need to know you meant what you said," she said, closing the door behind her. "At the gala, you asked what he did? I meant it," he said, "but I'll only move if you do." She sat opposite him and slid the journal forward. "It's more than a bruised ego," she said. "It's gambling, manipulation, cheating, threats. And this," she pulled out a slim USB drive, "is just the start. Access logs to his private accounts, hidden bank withdrawals. I trace money going to offshore gambling apps." Victor didn't react immediately. He just studied her like she was a chess piece that had just changed sides. "Why now?" he asked. "Because I stopped being scared of what leaving would destroy," she said. "Now I'm terrified of what staying will turn me into." He nodded once, then slid a sleek folder across the table. "I've had my suspicions. This," he tapped the USB, might be more valuable than you think. What do you want from me? I want you to walk into that boardroom next week, Victor said, as my strategic advisor. Alicia's breath caught. Are you serious? You know the company, the people, the dynamics, and you've seen it from a perspective most of us are too privileged to notice? She hesitated. What about Tom? You won't know until it's too late, Victor said. Let him underestimate you a little longer. That afternoon, Alicia received an email from HR. Effective immediately, Alicia Carter has been appointed Senior Strategic Consultant to the CEO. When Tom saw the press release, he burst into the study like a hurricane. What the hell is this? He barked, phone in hand. You work for Victor now? Behind my back? Alicia looked up from her tea, unbothered. You said I didn't understand business, so I decided to learn from someone who does. Don't be smug, he snapped. I made you. Don't forget that. She tilted her head. You didn't make me, Tom. You just tried to shrink me. He threw the phone onto the couch and stormed out. Alicia waited until the front door slammed shut before she whispered, Strike one. That night, her phone buzzed. A message from Victor. He'll panic. He'll smear you. Be ready. I've seen men like him crumble when the woman they control stops flinching. She locked her phone and turned off the lights. Somewhere in the dark, she smiled. The Monday boardroom was colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in looks. In silence, in the way people avoided meeting Alicia's eyes when she walked in wearing a navy dress with clean lines and no wedding ring. Tom was already seated at the table, flanked by senior managers playing the perfect husband. His jaw tightened when Alicia took the chair beside Victor. She noticed. Victor's voice cut through the silence. Let's begin. The presentation was routine. Sales projections, international licensing, forecasts. Until it wasn't. Midway through, Tom interrupted. Before we proceed, I'd like to bring something to everyone's attention. Alicia's stomach dropped, but her face stayed still. Tom reached into his leather folder and pulled out a printed document. It's come to my attention that some personal issues may compromise the objectivity of this board. He stood, theatrical as ever. Namely, my wife, Alicia Carter, has joined our executive team during a period in which our marriage is undergoing private difficulties. I question whether it's appropriate for someone in her position to serve in an advisory role, given her unstable emotional state. The jab landed, murmurs followed. Victor didn't flinch. Alicia didn't blink. But Tom wasn't done. She's been keeping a diary, he added with a smirk, filled with exaggerations, ramblings, pages meant to shame me and damage this company's reputation. I have a scanned copy, which I'm happy to circulate. Alicia's breath caught, not in fear, but in fury. Her diary. He had found it, violated it. Before Victor could speak, she stood. Actually, I'd like to address that. Her voice was clear, even. Yes, I kept a record of abuse, of emotional manipulation, of nights spent crying alone in our home while Tom gambled away our savings. She pulled a file from her own bag and opened it with a deliberate, surgical motion. I've included bank statements, time-stamped emails, surveillance from our home office. The diary you stole is part of a larger archive, one my attorney already submitted to legal counsel. That includes receipts of your transfers to online gambling platforms and photos of you meeting women booked through an escorting agency, listed under a shell corporation in Nevada. Silence collapsed over the room like glass. Tom's face turned to stone. Alicia continued, you want to talk about instability? Let's talk about you forging my signature to secure a company car lease last April. Or leaking insider pricing data to secure offshore bets. Victor leaned forward, folding his hands. I've reviewed the evidence. It's compelling. And the fact that you brought a stolen journal to a board meeting makes it worse. Tom stammered, the facade cracking. She's making it up. This is revenge. But his voice was swallowed by something more terrifying than rage. Quiet, professional scrutiny. It should have ended there. But the real betrayal came not from Tom. It came from Elena Cooper, Alicia's closest friend and former college roommate, now head of PR, stood up slowly. I'm sorry, Alicia, she said, turning to the board, but I think we need to question her motivations, too. Alicia's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You waited, Elena continued. You knew all this for months, but you only came forward when it benefited your own position. You're not exposing the truth. You're executing a coup. Alicia began, but Elena's face was already hard. She's trying to take Tom's position and yours, Victor. Victor raised a brow. Interesting theory. What exactly do you gain, Elena, by defending Tom so passionately? But Alicia already knew. Her voice dropped. You were sleeping with him, weren't you? The silence shattered again. Elena's mouth parted slightly, but no words came. Alicia stepped forward. The night of the Paris Gala. You told me to let it go. Now I know why. Elena's eyes dropped. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Oh, it didn't, Alicia said, to him. But to me, it meant I had no one in my corner, not even you. Tom stood, knocking over his chair. You're all insane. Victor stayed seated, unbothered. No, Tom, we're just done pretending. Security entered without a word. Victor had already anticipated this. They escorted Tom out, furious and flailing. He called Alicia a parasite, a gold digger, a fraud. She didn't flinch once. The room emptied slowly after that. Later, in the elevator, Victor and Alicia stood alone. I didn't know about Elena, he said. I did, Alicia replied. I just hoped I was wrong. He nodded once. He did well. She looked out at the city skyline. It wasn't about winning. Victor tilted his head. Then what was it about? Taking back the pen, she whispered, so I could write my own ending. The fallout came faster than Alicia expected. Within 48 hours of Tom's public removal from the company, media outlets swarmed with carefully curated statements. Carter Tech's PR team, under new leadership, issued a dignified release, one that painted the board's decision as necessary for ethical realignment. But underneath the polished corporate language, a war was brewing. Alicia saw the first salvo when she received a call from an unknown number. Hello? She answered, expecting another reporter. The voice on the other end was colder than December air. Precise. Icy. This is Margaret Carter. Alicia froze, the name landing like a slap. Tom's mother. I'd like to speak with you. In person. Margaret continued. No theatrics, just two women discussing the empire you've tried to dismantle. Alicia hesitated. Is that what you think I've done? I think you should come find out what I know before you burn the rest of this family to ash. She gave an address, a private club uptown, the kind with mahogany walls and generational wealth woven into the upholstery. When Alicia arrived the next afternoon, Margaret was already waiting in a private booth, stirring her tea with mechanical calm. She wore a cream blouse, pearl earrings, and the same withering gaze Alicia remembered from holidays and fundraisers. You've grown teeth, Margaret said by way of greeting. I wondered if you ever would. Alicia sat folding her hands. I didn't come for compliments. No, I imagine you came for a warning. Margaret sipped. Tom may be finished, but I assure you the Carter name is not. Alicia's jaw tightened. I never wanted the name, only freedom from it. Margaret studied her over the rim of her porcelain cup. You made yourself quite the symbol, Alicia. The wronged woman. Brave, principled, but let me ask you, do you think Victor Lawson aligned with you because he admired your courage? Alicia blinked. Margaret leaned in, voice quiet. He's not your savior. He's your replacement strategy. What are you talking about? Alicia asked, heart pounding. He's been planning Tom's removal for years. You were just timely. Emotional damage control and address. And once the dust settles, you'll be shuffled off quietly with a severance package and a press statement praising your grace under pressure. Alicia tried to push the words aside. Victor had supported her, elevated her, handed her power. But Margaret's gaze, cold, unwavering, felt too confident to ignore. You think I haven't considered that? Alicia said finally. That maybe Victor sees me as a pawn? Margaret raised an eyebrow. Then stop playing like one. The meeting ended in silence. That night, Alicia returned home to a package on her doorstep. No return address. Inside, a copy of a shareholder's report drafted weeks before the gala, outlining the potential restructuring of the company with executive partner AC listed in a footnote. Next to it, a handwritten note. I believe in your potential, but this game has more players than you think. A test, perhaps, a warning, or both. The following day, Alicia showed up early to the office, not in her usual composed elegance, but in a crisp black suit and low heels. No accessories, no distractions. She walked into Victor's office without knocking. He looked up from his laptop. Alicia, to what do I owe? Don't, she interrupted. Just answer one question. Victor sat back slowly, folding his hands. Did you plan to use me, she asked. From the beginning, a long pause followed. Finally, he said, I planned to remove Tom, that much is true, but I didn't expect you to be the one holding the match. Alicia studied him. Then what am I now? An equal, he said, if you want to be. You'll forgive me if I don't take your word for it. He nodded once. Then take a seat at the table, the real one. The quarterly strategy summit is next month. You'll be presenting alone. Alicia didn't reply right away. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was precision. I want everything. Transparent reports, access to the board's internal decisions, voting rights. Victor's smile was small, almost proud. spoken like someone who knows they've outgrown being rescued. She left the office without another word. By Friday, her name appeared in the internal executive directory as Partner Strategic Operations. No misses. No mention of Tom. That evening, as Alicia closed her laptop and glanced out at the city skyline, her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, "We need to talk." It was from a woman she didn't recognize. "My name's Helena. I was married to Tom Cotter before you were. I've seen your press conference. I know what he did. I want to tell you everything." Alicia stared at the message, her pulse quickening. The war was far from over. It had only just begun. The room was packed. Sleek suits, diamond watches, board members who measured time in stock points and revenue margins. But all eyes turned when Alicia walked in. No introduction, no apology. She stood at the front of the conference room, the city skyline behind her like a silent witness. On the massive screen behind her, the company's Q4 roadmap flickered to life, but it wasn't projections or market share charts that commanded attention. It was her voice. "Before I begin," Alicia said, her tone poised but unyielding, "I want to thank those of you who offered me support, and those who didn't, thank you as well. You taught me how to survive a room that wasn't built for me." Murmurs rippled, but none dared interrupt. "Let's talk about what happens when leadership is redefined, not inherited, not imposed, but earned." She clicked the remote, revealing the first slide, a graph showing the impact of ethical leadership on long-term shareholder returns. Victor, seated near the end of the table, watched in stillness, his expression unreadable. Alicia continued with elegance, cutting through the presentation with a blend of strategy, empathy, and precision. She outlined reform policies, introduced transparency protocols, and concluded with a call for a new culture at Carter Tech, one that valued character over charisma. By the end, the silence wasn't shock, it was reverent. As applause filled the room, Victor rose. He didn't speak at first, just nodded. Then, effective today, Alicia Cotter has been confirmed as Executive Partner of Strategy and Culture. Not a courtesy title, not a consolation prize, the real thing. After the meeting, Alicia returned to her office. The door now bore her name in etched gold. She barely had time to exhale before her assistant entered with a manila envelope. It was hand-delivered, no sender. Inside, photos, grainy but damning. Thomas ago, meeting with a former Carter Tech supplier who had been blacklisted for fraud. Underneath a note, "He's planning to sue for wrongful dismissal. These will help." Alicia sat back in her chair, the weight of the envelope pressing against her palms like a final offer. She could end Tom's public reputation for good. File a countersuit, leak the photos, finish what he started when he tried to ruin her. But something held her still, a quiet voice in her mind, not fearful, but wise. She walked over to the drawer where the golden locket lay, the one Tom gave her early in their marriage. She hadn't looked at it since the night she took it off. Now she opened it gently. Inside, a photo of their wedding day, her eyes bright, naive, desperate to belong. She stared at it for a long time, then slowly closed it and dropped the locket into the envelope, along with the photos. She sealed it. Later that evening, the package was mailed, not to the press, not to the lawyers, but to Tom. No message, no signature, just a quiet statement. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." At her desk, Alicia opened her audio journal for the last time. Day 227. I thought victory would feel louder, but it doesn't. It feels like stillness, like air in your lungs that finally belongs to you. She paused, then smiled. On her desk, beneath the lamp, sat a letter. "From one survivor to another," it read. "Thank you for speaking. You helped me find my voice too." Alicia looked out at the city. Somewhere below, stories like hers were still unfolding. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. She stood, straightened her spine, and walked into the future. No longer his wife. Now simply, Alicia.